Welcome to the Sheth Leadership Academy Lecture Series, where Professor Jagdish Sheth, author of books such as 7 Bad Habits of Self-Destructive Companies and Chindia Rising, delves into topics related to management and marketing, providing real-world examples in a compelling format. This lecture is on why innovations fail. Please enjoy.
As you all know, new product failure rate, even after testing in the market, fails almost 65 to 70%. Innovations that I'm thinking about are not just product improvements, but significantly different or very disruptive altogether new technologies, where the failure rate may be as great or more than strictly product improvement new products that we offer in the marketplace. So this lecture is designed to identify why market does not accept products. Is it because they don't provide enough value for consumers to switch over? Is it because there are some emotional, what one would consider behavioral aspects about adopting new innovation? Lots of research has been done, fortunately, in terms of adoption of innovations. So we will take some of those concepts and we'll add some more. Again, this is an area that I got very fascinated in the 80s while everybody was talking about diffusion of innovations and how you have these opinion leaders who influence the masses and everything is great, but the actual evidence showed that most people resist change. So I came out actually with a theory of innovation resistance. There are 2 doctoral dissertations done in an experimental way in laboratory. We were able to show that many of the propositions and the hypotheses that the theory advocated were actually true. It could be validated scientifically. And fundamentally, I found there are 2 aspects. One, if the habit of what customers do today is very strong, there will be a huge resistance to change. So we need to understand existing habits of what people consume, how they consume, what brands they patronize, what technologies they use, all this stuff. And the second dimension had to do with the risk associated with the innovation. If there is a significant economic risk with the failure of the innovation to perform, or even a social risk where adopting the innovation will make your friends and family laugh at you, it'll create a resistance to change or lack of adoption. So the theory was put in place. Now fast forward almost 30 years and we can think about its relevance in many ways in today's situation. So the presentation is titled, Why Do Most Innovations Fail? That's the title. And here are some of the key elements. First, reality, a truism is that most innovations fail in the marketplace. And the best examples I have here are Iridium, great new technology, low orbiting satellites, worldwide telecommunications, before the cell phones became even possible. Putting this global architecture, it was a technology marvel, but it failed miserably. Motorola was the pioneer, got all the governments of the world to agree upon a common license architecture, even motivated many of the government long-distance international subsidiaries, which are government monopolies, to invest money, and this was a multi-billion-dollar failure. Unfortunately, it did not realize its market potential. So one can analyze as to why it failed. We already know the story about Betamax, a superior standard during the days of VCRs and video cassettes. Sony created that standard, but somehow it never took off, and instead we got the VHS, a somewhat of an inferior standard, and again it took off. So why great innovations fail is a mystery that we'll hopefully solve it in this lecture. More importantly, many great successes of new products and innovations are by accident and less by business plans. In fact, sometimes I even say it is despite marketing plans. And the best stories are the cellular telephone in 1985 when it was commercialized. Government mandated estimating the demand so they can provide license opportunities accordingly. And at the time, with the excellent consultancy companies, Bell Labs owned experts, the estimate was that the cell phones probably will not see more than 980,000 subscribers by year 2000. Of course, that forecast everybody missed by a few billions. Cell phone now is actually used by more than half the world population, close to 4 billion, and the GSM format of cell phone actually will roll out the third billion, and it'll take only like 18 months to penetrate 1 more billion customers in the marketplace. So cell phone is a success by accident, not according to plan. And it could be the market that accepted cell phones may not be the market for which the company was targeting it, which was primarily business to business market for emergency services, doctor on the call, running from hospital to hospital, gets this emergency call, where a cell phone became pretty much a consumer mass market product. Ford Mustang the same way. Idea was great. Young adults wanted their own car. That car should look different than their parents' car. Came out with the concept of a two-door car that is very affordable, because one of the key problems with young adults is that they don't have the money. Make it very affordable. In fact, the price of Mustang was about 1/3 to about 40% of the normal price of a full sedan, which was Impala or Chevrolet, Caprice were the two models at that time. This is in the 60s. They did everything right from a research viewpoint. They built a brand new factory to make a small car because all others were big cars. Rolled out this 18 months before the national introduction by giving it to college co-eds on the one hand and flight attendants on the other hand who drove around. You notice the car. You notice the girl first and the car second, or car first and the girl second. In the target audience, they did the data tracking and they found that more than 90% of the target audience knew Mustang by name and Ford Motor Company as the car maker. You cannot get better promotional dollar return from an awareness viewpoint. Except the company forgot one little detail. In that young adult market of 16 to 21, only 4% ever bought a new car. Rest of them all got used cars from parents' cars, or they got a used car from a dealer that parents paid for. So if you take the 4% population out of the target population of young adults, they would have sold less than 65,000 units per year over a 3-year cycle. The break-even point was 240,000 units to be sold annually to actually make money of this car beyond 3 years, because it was a brand new factory, brand new suppliers. It was a heavy fixed cost venture. And lo and behold, it sold 420,000 units first year out. While they're promoting to the target audience, it turns out it was the dad of that young adult who bought the car for himself, and he did not want anybody in the family to touch that car. Fortunately for Ford, after the Edsel failure, they learned how to track the data from dealers, asking the sales guy at the dealer to report not only the car name and the address, but the age, gender, etc. Income, of course, they will know from financing, etc. And suddenly, rather than getting 18, 20-year-old as the owner of the car, they were getting somebody in the mid-40s. And they scrambled and changed their advertising, they changed their dealership plans and everything, and made it into a success. Similarly, all of these kinds of successes by accident or miserable failures arise despite a lot of prior market research. At the concept level, product design level, commercially test marketing, where you bring all the elements of marketing mixed together, distribution, price, packaging, everything, you bring it together, and still it fails. And one of the best failures we have seen is Segway. Technologically a marvel. A lot of hype was created, pre-publicity. Sort of an energy-saving device, became a miserable failure. It is surviving as a niche product, just like Iridium, but not the mass market success that people thought will happen out of Segway. It is also a universal phenomenon of this kind of accidental success or massive failures about innovations, both in advanced countries as well as in emerging markets. There's nothing about advanced countries that does this thing. It is universal, essentially. The old literature in marketing and innovation from a market adoption is very famous author Everett Rogers, who created this whole research on the innovation adoption by farmers, and later on some research on innovation adoption by medical doctors, to understand why and how consumers adopt innovations, and came out with a theory of diffusion diffusion of innovation with the idea that you have the very strong opinion leaders, a handful of people who influence others because they are community leaders in the farming community, or they're highly respected medical doctors, and everybody has done their internship and residency under those famous doctors, mostly at teaching colleges or research and medical universities by and large. So they came out with a chart, as you can see, pretty much dividing the distribution, and the distribution matches what we call S-shaped curve of innovation. You have the first 2.5% who are called on the left side innovators. These people are absolutely just obsessed with innovation. They are indiscriminate. Any innovation they just love to buy, but they are not influential on the majority. They're like deviants essentially. They're not a part of the social networking. The real change agents are the next 13.5%, which is called the early adopters, or actually opinion makers. Then you have they influence what is called the early majority, which is where you see the takeoff of the innovation, tipping point happens as it is called. Then you have the late majority, and then innovation begins to plateau, markets begin to mature, and you have the last group of people, which is 13.5 plus 2.5%, about 16%, they're just called laggards. In fact, what you see in the language itself is you have to be pro-innovation to be in the Western world by labeling them as laggards and labeling the early adopters as opinion makers. Whereas my research showed that people resist change. They are habituated, as I mentioned earlier. So while we have a lot of research on diffusion of innovation, we don't have any good research or theory of innovation resistance. And that's what we will try to do in this presentation. So here are the 6 reasons why most innovations fail in the marketplace. The first 3 reasons are all rational reasons, and the next 3 are all what I call emotional reasons. In other words, the next 3 you cannot engineer in the product. You cannot change the innovation through design, through packaging, changing in the ingredients, etc., as you can do on the first 3 bottlenecks or reasons why innovations fail in the marketplace. So we will go through each one of them. As you can see in the pie chart, I've given one example, like Concorde as a supersonic air transport eventually had to be shut down because performance was poor in terms of energy performance, noise, and ultimately there was a crash. And Air France Concorde crashed, and governments decided enough is enough. They never made money on it either, so neither it was good for the airline, nor was it really that great for the passengers, except the speed. You could reach intercontinental flights in 3.5 hours or something like that. So it was very convenient for people who had to be there, let's say from New York to London on the same day, or in an emergency or some sort of an urgent deal like a merger acquisition. Before, private jets, corporate jets came into play. And once you saw the rise of corporate jets, companies owning their own jets and having their CEOs and the owners fly all over the world to make deals, Concorde was not necessary anymore. Lack of relative value is the second one, and the best example I have here is Corfam. This was a synthetic material DuPont created. It felt like leather, had even the breathability of leather, but it could not substitute the leather-based shoes because they were so inexpensive. Corfam was so expensive, so price to performance was not in its favor. US government military actually patronized it to create a market, but eventually died out in the marketplace. Usage incompatibility is the third one, where dishwashers experienced that. Dishwashers could not be integrated into existing kitchens. And therefore, you had to have this rollout on a portable roller dishwashers, plug it into hot and cold water. Dishwashers needed so much of warm, hot water that your hot water tank could not take that, cannot provide that one. It needed a wiring for 220, 50 voltage, for example. Most wiring in America were 110 voltage and 60 cycles. It did not work out. Eventually, they did something to solve the problem. Next three are, as I said, emotional reasons. One is perceived risk, not an actual risk, and this comes from irradiated foods that are treated with radiation for preservation and shelf life. In fact, in the US, most people are very hesitant to use anything that's radiated, like a cobalt, because of the fear of radiation from World War II days. And therefore, while the foods can be kept fresher and preserved properly, consumers have an image or an issue problem, perceived risk problem, they would not use it. I've done some experiments on this one, which I will talk about later later on if I have the time. But irradiated foods now offered, for example, a lot of organic milk is treated with radiation. Many agricultural products are treated with radiation, but you don't advertise, you don't promote it, and government allows you to do that thing. So people consume it without knowing it even. Tradition or orthodoxy, it really conflicts with your belief system. You don't want to go against your belief system. So for example, if you're a chicken farmer and I won't like to put a contact lens in the eyes of the chicken, I worry about it as a farmer, million chickens, for example. What will my neighbor think? I'm going high tech. Although contact lens is very good because chickens, when you put them in a coop, cannibalize each other. But if you put contact lens and distort their vision from 20/20 to less than that, they don't see the size of the other chicken, therefore they don't fight among themselves. So cannibalization drops from 25% to 11%, for example. The old method used to be you debeak the chickens so that they are not as sharp and pecking. It does not bleed the other chicken to death, but it creates its own negative consequences. So this was a great technology, but total failure. Cost was not a problem. Performance was not a problem. Value was there, but it strictly would go against the tradition of how do I raise my chicken, let's say for egg laying purposes or for meat, interestingly. Or you might have a negative image about the innovation by association with the industry, which has a negative image, like smoking nowadays, or association with a country. And this is a story about Indian machine tools, where India could make heavy engineering products, but in the 60s the world thought India is a country of roaming cows and snake charmers. A strictly an agrarian society cannot do industrial heavy machinery products, and therefore Indian machine tools suffer from that image, and therefore there were strategies designed to overcome that negative image. So let's go into each one of them and show you what the companies have learned to do. The first one is poor performance. That means innovation does not work consistently, reliability, or generates negative side effects. And of course, the side effects are very, very common issues in all prescription drugs. In fact, all of the drugs that are discovered recently seem to have mega side effects. So you go through clinical trials. Efficacy is the benefit or the performance. How can you increase the efficacy through clinical trials, learning it, and how do you reduce the side effects? And government then certifies that this drug is certified for a specific disease, etc. But that's clearly one reason why many drugs are failure in the marketplace. Home networking, we have been talking about it now for at least 20 years that I know. Before that one, we wanted to create smart homes. It never happened. Where a refrigerator is smart, talking in fact to your automobile, all that stuff. Hopefully in the future, with common standards, it might become a reliable technology as it is in the enterprise market. But the home market still is not there till we have a proper wireless technology, whether it's a Wi-Fi or a 3G or 4G, however it is. So this is still evolving. So how do you overcome poor performance? The first one is to simulate into the contingencies, especially extreme usage contingencies. So it's a virtual testing of the new product or innovation in catastrophic situations. So for example, space shuttle. Till you launch it, you don't know what's going to happen. So you imagine the space, you train the astronauts, you come out with mock simulation devices. So you feel like a virtual reality, and therefore through that testing, you know when the mission is actually taking off that the shuttle will perform based upon it. Even then we have seen so many failures in shuttles, either by a little component not working, sometimes radio doesn't work, sometimes there's a fallout on the shield mechanisms, etc. We have seen all this stuff, and ultimately now, as you know, shuttle program will be shut down completely, finding some alternative solution to have a man in the space or people in the space. A nuclear submarine is the same way. Very complicated technology. And how do you keep it under the sea? So we learn quite a lot through simulation devices. This is clearly one recommendation that comes about. Second one is gradual rollout. In other words, don't do it on a mass scale. Roll out in an experimental setting. Learn from the way it is used by the consumers, not buyers, but actual users. And that's what we are learning today in stem cell therapy. In other words, stem cells could be molded to reproduce a given organ like like a kidney or a heart, and you inject those stem cells to have a defective heart become better, as opposed to the traditional heart surgeries or a bypass or actually heart replacement, which are a lot more expensive. So stem cells we are learning and discovering by trial and error, which is what I would call gradual rollout. And we have seen the same thing with many platform softwares. There are several generations of softwares, whether those are Facebook type social media softwares or Google type softwares. You are learning as you are evolving, pretty much an iterative process as it is called, which is the second mechanism. The third mechanism to improve is to really provide a cross-disciplinary team of different functional experts and specialists. Put them together. And this is how the internet came about. Internet was a multidisciplinary effort to come out with a common transmission standard, TPC over IP as it is called, or IP over TPC. How do you take the telephone standards and convert them to a common architecture, a de facto standard, even though it was funded by the government for its own reasons, like a DARPA as it is called, which is a defense agency, or for NSF among the scientists to have mainframe computers talk to each other. Internet today is definitely a universal platform, and it has evolved. And by the way, those who are into internet, you all know that what we have created so far is a dumb internet. All it does is routing and addressing. Internet 2 is more intelligent or smart internet. Its capabilities are mind-boggling, and there are at least 55 universities and their scientists who are coming together to create an internet 2 architecture, which, if it does happen as a de facto standard, pushes the whole capability of the internet to a level that we have unimagined so far. I mean, we talk about the 1.0 and 2.0 and 3.0. This goes into much greater capability. So these are all things you learn, as we have done with an alternative to the OS standard or the Microsoft standard, what is called Linux. Group of people, volunteers working, contributing in terms of software evolution by and large. So it's a team of people who are working and come out with a standard. So this is a third recommendation. Second major barrier is lack of relative value. So performance price ratio of the innovation does not justify switching from existing alternatives. Not only there's a switching cost, which is the habit, but also it says that the value for the new product is just not economically viable, and therefore there is no performance price ratio in its favor. Kevlar is an artificial material created by DuPont on the principle of lightness of a fabric, but the strength of a steel. Very unique invention, very unique innovation. It was designed for passenger tires as they were becoming radial tires. So the belting was done by steel, which added a lot of weight. Again, after that energy crisis of 74, 78, government mandated more stringent EPA standards, fuel efficiency standards. So passenger tire makers, whose customers were automobile makers, demanded something that would be like a fabric, like a nylon, but would have the strength of a steel. Came Kevlar. But in that commodity market of passenger tires, it could never make economic sense. So even today, Kevlar is not used in passenger tires. DuPont as a company realized that while it was innovated for one industry, it seems to have a performance price ratio in favor of Kevlar in other industries. For example, industry where you will reduce the weight at any cost, and that is where the new hybrid composite materials came from. So for example, military aircrafts, fighter planes. You make it lighter so its range goes higher. You can take it to a higher altitude, whatever it is, increases the capability. It became a success. They came out with the same thing, surprisingly, for bulletproof vests. It's lighter material, but it stops the bullet. So it became not only military, but also any security places. You have now the bulletproof vest. It went on identifying other applications as a way of creating value. And as I said, even today, while it was invented for passenger tires, it is still not able to have a performance price ratio despite the cost of Kevlar coming down over time. So how do you improve relative value? The first one is to just learn how to make it more affordable. And now with the rise of the emerging economies where the markets are, many companies are learning that rather than take the product innovated for advanced countries which are very expensive and maybe localize it for regulatory purposes or physical, functional purposes, why can't we not design them over there? Basically, it's called reverse innovation. And General Electric has taken a lead among many other companies, by the way. All packaged goods companies are doing the same thing. In medical instruments, where you come out with a medical instrument, let's say ECG, echocardiogram, for example, at 1/10 or 1/20th of the price. You make them portable because there is no electricity in many of the rural parts of these countries. They're agricultural economies, and you begin to come out with innovation, so you improve affordability and maybe accessibility. I see the same thing with cloud computing. I don't have to invest in hardware anymore. Actually, I just may not even need a thin client, as it is called, but I have all my information stored in a large storage company, which could be Amazon, which could be Google, or any of the telephone companies who have huge servers and storage capacity. So I keep my information over there and I retrieve it through the internet interaction by and large, making very affordable to get into the IT scenarios or getting into computerization. Third way to improve is to do value-add applications. We say is that product performance rises relative to its price. Its capability increases. And we have seen that thing with iPod. Think about on such a small little device, how many songs I can store, how many songs I can organize as a library. Think about the days when people had the large LPs where you had all the songs and you had to stack them physically in a space. Even cassettes, when they came out for music, had to organize it. This does so much of automation organizing. It has a memory to retrieve what you want to do. Might have an artificial intelligence even. And it created strong economic value, not just for the consumers, like making it affordable, like 99 cents for a download. And most of the downloads on iPod were not really the music of good singers, etc., but they were strictly tunes for cell phones. That's the largest business. But what they did very smartly was to create value for the large music studios like Sony Music or, for example, any of the other music studios. And the reason is that most of that was pirated. So now what is a pirated business where the owner of those labels, records, and the artist is making no money, including the artist, you learned how to make money. iPod became a success because the people who own the content were willing to license to resell it through Apple company. And iPhone has done a similar value add through applications. I mean, I'm amazed how many applications are coming on iPhone and iPad. I was told within 1 year of iPhone introduction, 2-3 years ago, there were 200,000 applications. Unthinkable. Huge value add, which means you make the device indispensable, not because of the device and its capability, but all the value add capability that you are adding. You make the device more versatile, more useful to you, right? Next area is to reposition the innovation for a higher value. So cell phones have become commodity, and now everybody is moving toward converting cell phones into smartphones, whether it's an Android platform or an Apple platform, whatever the platforms are. Iridium that I talked about was a miserable failure for everyday calls, has become invaluable into very remote places where let's say the journalist will go out for an interview, or expeditions take place where scientists are working into North Pole, South Pole, inaccessible places where you have a phone connectivity because there is no other way you can connect to the rest of the world except by Iridium phone technology. So they become a niche specialty company creating high value, and people for that application or that usage are willing to pay. So your price performance ratio becomes more viable. The third main bottleneck from market acceptance, and this is still a rational aspect, is usage incompatibility. Often products are designed not from a user viewpoint, but from a buyer viewpoint. And after the consumer buys the product, he or she finds that they are just not compatible in the ecosystem of usage. I mean, I've done so much of research on this one where somebody comes out with a large box of cereals, value pack, great performance price value. It's the same cereal that we are all used to, such as Kellogg's Corn cornflakes or Cheerios, doesn't make any difference. And now the question is that the regular cabinets were not designed for large boxes. So where do you keep it? You keep it under the sink, which is the only large space where you have all of these chemicals, dishwasher chemicals, detergent chemicals. And Saturday morning, kids wake up early watching cartoons, they take their own cereal, you make it a hazard there. So you have all kinds of user incompatibilities or user side effects that we need to worry about. So as I mentioned to you, dishwasher was one of those products. So the only way out obviously was to put the dishwasher in new home construction, new apartment construction, where it is a built-in and it's a part of the total package that you sell. Grazon is a company that I was involved. This was an incredible innovation at University of Illinois. In fact, the advisory board had like 3-4 Nobel Prize winners or nominees. Cow is a very inefficient animal from a feeding viewpoint. Going through all the stomachs, etc., cow dung actually has tremendous amount of nutrition, but it also has bacteria. So what if I can kill the bacteria and retrieve the cow dung and feed it back to cow? Cow can't tell the taste difference. But you see immediately two problems. One is, how do you collect the cow dung on large cattle farm? Very hard. You cannot put a diaper on the cow to have a collection mechanism. Then we ran into the other problem that even if you could do it, there is always a nutrition expert either on behalf of the government or the companies who says, is this the right feed or not? And they have all the image problems. What if the consumer finds out that your cow was fed by its own cow dung? There's all kinds of emotional issues. So this was a great technology, but it died because of incompatibility in terms of its operations by and large. So how do you overcome incompatibility? One of the things is to make it mandatory. By making it mandatory, everybody has to change, whether they like it or not. Old habits are broken. We have learned that through smoke-free airplanes, smoke-free hotel rooms, smoke-free corporate things. It was good for the corporations. It's good to reduce the consumption of cigarettes. We call it demarketing in marketing. Rather than promote it, you discourage it. And today, with the new regulation, healthcare records are all going from, let's say, manual to actually, in fact, automated, which gives you better reliability. So performance improves. It's very compatible with the way doctors do it because everything else is computerized now. So ultimately, a device like an iPad can become a device the doctor carries everywhere. It's so intuitive. Even the most resistant doctors who are refusing to be computerized are now able and willing to go through that because it's mandatory. Voluntarily, they won't do it. At the universities, we have done the same thing. Today, in my executive MBA program, the students don't get notebooks anymore, printed copy. All the content is put on the iPad, and they are given an iPad either free or at a subsidized rate. iPad will become the backpack for school children. It's a matter of time. Interesting thing. But make it mandatory. The school system mandates that. If you allow the choice to parents or the students, it may not happen. So mandatory is a very key way of creating market and overcoming the incompatibility, as we have seen with the airbags and seat belts and all the stuff by and large. I am a very strong believer, if I go back to that slide, about mandatory consumption, mandatory marketing as I call it. If it's socially useful and relevant, like high protein, low cost foods or meals that are healthy for school children, the only way out is not just education, not just persuasion, but making it by rules and regulations. Then only it will take off. It becomes universal, and therefore there's a market that is created despite its incompatibility. The second major approach to solving the incompatibility problem is to target an OEM market. In other words, if the innovation is so radically different that its use will not work very well in the existing ecosystem, you create an OEM market. And OEM, as you know, stands for Original Equipment Manufacturer. And the two examples I have are just great examples. One is OnStar, brilliant technology. General Motors has created this technology, and they found it's supposed to be for emergency assistance if you have some accident on the road. It is basically cellular network based. It's terrestrial, therefore, rather than a satellite based technology. What GM decided was to invest this or install this in their luxury cars first, like Cadillac, Lincolns, etc. But now it is in Chevrolet. Try to create a demand for this one would have been much harder. They could not mandate it either by government rules, regulations. So they decided they will build into the automobile. Its capabilities are fantastic. It does more than emergency assistance. It basically becomes your own personal assistant on wheels. So you don't have to have a separate cellular telephone that you need to talk to, for example. In fact, I don't need any of these mobile devices. The car itself becomes smart. OnStar now is licensed to other manufacturers, especially to non-American manufacturers like a Honda, for example. And it is becoming a de facto standard. So often you overcome incompatibility by creating a de facto standard, and a few decision makers like the car makers make the decisions for consumers, just like mandatory consumption, but it is not mandatory by law. It is by industry get together. Same thing is happening with composite materials that I talked about, which are the next generation of materials made from chemicals, but they have the strength of steel or even more, and the lightness of a fabric. That combination, like a Kevlar, they're Kevlar based but a lot more complicated and a lot more difficult to duplicate. Actually turns out to be to copy them. So that's becoming a much more an OEM market, primarily by creating those and selling it to people who will build aircrafts, etc., etc. Eventually it might become a consumer product, but not right now. The third approach to overcoming incompatibility is to take a solution perspective as opposed to an innovation or a product perspective, which means think of the whole ecosystem and try to create a solution. For example, hardware software integration. And as you saw on a personal computer platform, it was the Microsoft and Intel, and I think they call it Wintel or something like that, put together. That's basically as a platform. And those two came together, a software company and a hardware company, integrating that so that a PC becomes what it is, and we are all users of the PC. And the same thing would be true for the tablets, and same thing would be true for the netbooks, etc. Second area that I can talk about is telemedicine. Telemedicine, we have been talking for quite some time, but during the mainframe computer days it was so expensive. But today with the internet and devices like the iPad, telemedicine is going to go enormously, where it says I can do remote observation, remote diagnosis, and therefore all the inefficiencies of location and distribution of where the patients are and where the experts are goes away. There's a lot of capacity in healthcare, but it is locked in. Just like I talked about energy generation, power generation capacity, electricity, locked in by utility, and under Carter administration, they mandated capacity has to be sold if you're not using it, by deregulating the generation business from what is called the distribution and transmission business. So there's clearly one. Telemedicine, my view, is at the tipping point where it will take off probably in the decade of the year 2011 or definitely the next decade. It's a matter of time. It will take off. Just like ERP systems took a solution approach, that an enterprise has resources, all resources. So you have the strategic planning, you have the operations management, you have the financial piece, everything that a company does, and you simulate or emulate that, such as SAP, what it does, Oracle, what they do, and then you integrate the supply chain and what is called CRM, customer-facing platforms, and ultimately e-commerce. So you can integrate all this stuff, and that's a solution approach by creating what is incompatible into a compatible. Now we are getting into the emotional reasons why market rejects a great innovation. It's functioning well. There's a price performance value proposition. It is compatible also. And as I gave you the example about irradiated food. So when we did focus group interviews with housewives, and we simply say homemakers, children's cereal, we say, look, this is it tastes, how does it taste in a blind test? Cereal is much fresher, as if it's just off the oven, baked oven kind of a thing, just off, the oven. It's very fresh. Could be true for muffins, could be true for anything. It kills all the bacteria. Shelf life is much stronger. And you simply say, taste this cereal, and you have no problem because you can use the cereal as it is, put the milk in the bowl. It glows a little. So what? It does not glow. But that's the first question we get from all consumers. Simply say, does it glow? Because our image is that radiation glows, for example. We went through the same risk about microwave ovens, for your information. I remember in the late 60s, early 70s, people were very, very adverse to using microwave ovens because they thought radiation is built in, which is true, and therefore it will be actually dangerous to the health. Today, you can't live without a microwave oven. Microwave ovens are absolutely a necessity, probably more necessity now than a oven itself or a dishwasher even. You have to have a refrigerator, and the next thing you have to have is a microwave oven. And even though we may have once in a while studies that shows you that there is a risk, behind the whole thing, and it may be a news item or some sensational news, people simply say, radiation or no radiation, I need a microwave oven, okay? In fact, to me, it has become probably the most liberating device for a mother in the family, because young children can be independent now. You don't have to be there. They can operate the microwave oven. Husband can operate the microwave oven. So you have much more flexibility of time and the location than ever before. So that's what it is. The project that at General Motors we worked on in their research center, which is called a tech center, world class, was a project called Metro Guideway Systems, where we ran into a perception problem. Perception risk is basically a subjective risk inherent in the adoption of the innovation. And this could be the subjective risk about will it work or it won't work, performance. It could be about a physical risk. Will I have enormous consequences like I can die or side effects in a drug? Or it could be economic risk. If I buy, I will lose a lot of money. There may not be a resale value, for example. Like new automobiles, quite often that's the case. Because if you buy the car and try to sell it next day, value drops enormously. This Metro Guideway System was a fantastic project. It is basically a highway that you build. It has no noise pollution. It has no air pollution. Your car is a dual mode. So you bring the car to this special highway, no money transactions, everything is automated. And you get into the highway, car engine stops and car is slotted into the highway, which is going at 35 miles per hour to as high as speedy as 70 miles per hour during traffic time. It's very much like people movers at Disney World. That's one lane. Another lane would be for the buses, what's called a group transit. Cars are called personal transit. And then in the city area, maybe a radius of about 5 to 6 miles from the center, now you have at the same elevated highway, driverless taxis. You order them, you get inside, it's just like an elevator, but rather than going vertically, it goes horizontally and it'll drop you to a destination that you have punched from wherever you are. Everything is automated, essentially. This project, when we did the research on consumers, the first question they raised was that if you have a mass catastrophe, a power failure, what happens? Our biggest issue came out that many people, when their hands are off the driving, may start drinking while they're just sitting in the car. And when the car is kicked out of the highway to go into the local streets, will they be able to drive back again? There was all kinds of perception problems in the minds of the consumers. They were not real in many ways, but they were imagined. And therefore, you have to reduce this risk. So how do you do that? First major mechanism is to offer free trials. Let people get used to it and comfortable that many of their imaginary risks are just not there. And this has been done with a lot of software as a trial software. Now most social media are free. You try it out, you like it, you get addicted kind of a notion. And I saw the same thing in agriculture with hybrid seeds. Farmers were not so sure whether hybrid seeds will work very well. And by the way, this is the same risk we have now about genetically modified seeds. Same problem. People are very worried whether those are the good things for the human life or not. Nobody knows the long-term consequences, but Monsanto, that has been the innovator, is struggling with this issue. Genetically modified cotton, like a BT cotton, is okay, but if you can produce a rice or a wheat like that, people are objecting to that right now. They're very cautious, very careful. So offer free trials and see what happens. Obtain testimonials from well-respected opinion leaders. This is back to that opinion leadership theory that Everett Rogers was very passionate about, and he researched on that in the agriculture, in the farming community. So in new medical practices, this is always the case. Well-known hospitals that do clinical trials, such as Sloan Kettering Hospital or Harvard Medical School or Boston General Hospital, for example, Mass General Hospital. There are certain hospitals which are always leading in terms of clinical trials. Their reputation is what you use to say as a way of reference or a testimonials by and large. And you also have in B2B market, business to business market, what is called reference accounts. Some key accounts where if they adopt other accounts, other customers will say, if they adopt it, it should be legitimate, it should be okay. And you give them an enormous discount or a beta trial as it is called. That's the second major mechanism. You can again sell it through OEMs, where only a handful of people will make a decision. And as we talked about earlier, Michelin tires went through the same thing by selling tires in Sears brand name, because Sears wanted only their own label and they were willing to go along because their brand was sold only in Europe, not in America. And eventually they rolled out Michelin brand after successfully selling it through Sears brand in Sears stores. Fifth problem in the marketplace, second emotional reason, is tradition or orthodoxy. And as I talked about, putting contact lenses in the eyes of the chicken. Economics are in its favor. It can be done, but the farmer would simply say, you must be kidding. My neighbor will laugh at me. So how do you overcome orthodoxy or tradition? So market resists innovation because it threatens existing belief systems. And there is a lot of research done about this one, which is fascinating. There was a psychologist called Leon Festinger who had a theory called cognitive dissonance, which says that when your reality and your belief systems don't match, what happens? His view was that reality is so experiential, ultimately you rationalize your belief system to match with the reality. In the beginning, you reject it. So for example, he had a massive experimental done in a whole town, which was very religious, faith-based town in Midwest in America, I think in Illinois someplace. Has a great book called When Prophecy Fails. And he motivated the farming community, religious community, to believe that there is a doomsday, that community people will be saved and they will revitalize the human race while the rest of the world will be destroyed. So they even built a shelter for themselves, stored all the foods, and all these disasters happen midnight for some reason. So there was a clock. Midnight comes, there's a bell ringing, and nothing happens. So what do? You have a strong belief system, so first thing you begin to say, maybe clock is wrong, or maybe I did not calculate the doomsday properly through some numerology or however they did it. The experimenters walked out casually, and ultimately the community understood there was no doomsday, not at least on that day, but the faith is so strong in that belief system that you hold on to that belief system. So how do you overcome? So as we talked about contact lenses for chicken in this particular case, and also outsourcing clinical trials. Most pharmaceutical companies, despite cost affordability of outsourcing, you get better price and maybe better performance, are very hesitant to outsource R&D. As at one time we were very hesitant to outsource IT services, even to IBM, Accenture, let alone Indian IT software companies. But today it is given. Payroll services, you never outsourced employees' checks in the hands of somebody else, but today ADP does most of that. So outsourcing always has been in that category where it's much more the tradition of how we do the business and how do you break the tradition. And usually this happens under tough economic times, where you re-engineer the corporation essentially. You re-engineer the way you do business, re-engineer the way you have a supply chain, re-engineer the way you do customer support, you do sales function, whatever it is. And that's the primarily definition. So how do you overcome the belief systems? One, of course, is to educate. This requires providing workshops, training, and education. And as you know, in the healthcare, there's a significant shift. It is not taking care of the illness after the illness has arisen, but actually creating a wellness programs to prevent the illness altogether. Because the cost to the company, cost to the society after the fact is enormous, such as obesity problem, high blood pressure or a hypertension problem, etc. And therefore you have all of the cardiac heart diseases. How can we prevent it through wellness programs? And companies strongly now encourage almost mandatory wellness or physical fitness programs by and large. In schools, they are doing the same thing. It's a part of the education, part of the curriculum, and you provide them more and more knowledge and information with which to see if they would change their belief system, right? Our second one is fuse with existing culture. If the innovation is so radically different, then you begin to incorporate into the existing practice if possible, and you blend it. So you are not changing the belief system, you are fusing the new innovation into the belief system. So my example is Christian yoga. Yoga and meditation have become so mainstream in the Western world, but it won't be done by some Indian yoga or meditation expert coming out, or what one calls guru, a spiritual leader, but it is incorporated in the daily church activities, and that is called what I call a Christian yoga. You incorporate into your practice, and you also make sure that it is acceptable and therefore does not go against the Christian faith, for example. In fact, Christian faith says it is as well and a welcome practice as anything else we have created. So it is not like adopting Hinduism. You separate yoga meditation from Hinduism as a religion and more like a practice of wellness in some fashion. And we have seen the same thing with organic ingredients now, or organic foods. You are basically going against the tradition to say, or inorganic or processed foods are not as good for you, and now you begin to fuse it into same supermarkets where you might get organic foods next to inorganic foods. You get gluten-free foods nowadays because of the allergy along with, and gluten-free has become almost a healthcare fad fashion. People who don't have gluten allergy like that food because it's healthy kind of a notion. The next one is use change agents. You may not be able to influence the market, but there are change agents, and most of them are regulatory bodies like mandatory consumption, but they come out with new standards. So US Department of Agriculture, USDA, does it in agriculture by setting different standards about grades of different agricultural products, including, let's say, pork, beef, chicken, or agricultural commodities like rice, wheat, whatever we produce. It is that jurisdiction. FDA is doing the same thing. Medical instruments are now under FDA regulation, but they also are now putting some regulatory framework on alternate medicines, or what's called holistic medicine by and large. So you can use, and of course accreditation agencies like university accreditation can require different things to be added into accreditation, or allow you to a technology like online education allowed for degree granting. So accreditation can become a very influential agent to overcome the tradition by and large. Last area is what's called negative image. Market resists innovation because it has acquired a negative image by sheer association, not engineered, but just association with its origin, either with a product class or with an industry or a country. We have done a lot of research in marketing of made in a given country. You might remember before the rise of Japan as a major industrial power, made in Japan used to be laughed at by Germans and Americans. Then Japanese put quality standards, will not allow anybody to make cheaper, inferior products. Japan became one of the best innovators, best quality products in the world. Then the same image went to made in Taiwan, made in Korea, and today that image is primarily made in China. Today we often laugh at made in China would be so cheap, but the quality may not be that good, which is, by the way, a stereotype, because China makes all quality products, the best quality and the junk. So my view is that one of these days Chinese will follow the Japanese model. Simply don't allow lower end, poor quality, low priced manufacturing in China, and suddenly becomes a nation offering higher quality premium products, essentially, just like Japan did it, just like Korea has done. Samsung, Hyundai automobile, they're all considered premium or great brand names. So that's really what one can do. And by the way, this was true for instant coffee after World War II. I did research on this one myself also in the 60s, but there was a classic study done where people imagined that instant coffee cannot be as good in taste as a drip grind regular coffee. And maybe the early days of instant coffee, which was created for World War II soldiers in the battlefield to drink that coffee, along with cigarettes, which were two key habits of soldiers. Instant coffee could have improved over time, such as freeze-dried coffee, for example, 100% coffee rather than having chicory, or something mixed with it. But in a blind test, the consumers cannot tell the difference. But when you tell them it's instant coffee, they would say it doesn't taste good anymore. So we began to look at the stereotypes people associate about who uses the instant coffee and change that negative image, or disassociate instant coffee from that image. As I mentioned earlier, genetically modified crops is suffering from the same set of issues, and made in China we just talked about is at a country of origin level issues, just like Indian machine tools in the 60s. So how do you reduce the negative image? You disassociate the product with that negative image association, in this case by country. So Indian machine tools, we did that. In fact, we wanted to make sure that contradictory reality may arise. So you bring the delegations of your big customers, which are aerospace industry, that would be actually, automobile industry, for example. You bring them as buyers, and in front of the most modern factory, you have a snake charmer. So you confront the reality. Machines are good. We created a worldwide exhibitions, permanent showrooms in Chicago, in Cleveland, in Dusseldorf, where buyers of machine tools come. Not only you go to the exhibitions or trade shows, but you have a permanent showroom where people can feel, see, touch that machine. And you begin to change the image with experience by and large. So I think you can disassociate, as it has happened more recently with the Indian IT services. Primarily became like a call center jokes and call center people with all the accents. But today, Indian IT services industry is highly respected for the quality of software engineers and more complex tasks they can perform to serve an IT department in a large company by and large. Second way is to reduce, is to invent a new image. And this is a classic story about prunes. In the old days, as soon as you use the word prunes, because of its association with wrinkles and old age and prunes as a laxative, people will start laughing. Oh, it's old people's product. So young people won't consume it. And there were famous campaigns done by companies. But today what they've done is to just don't call it prunes. Call it dried plums. And it sells like hotcakes. So you basically have changed and come out with a new image. They've done with the raisins the same way. It's very fascinating how in agricultural products, for whatever reason, we have negative associations, and companies or agricultural cooperative societies create very positive image, such as for orange juice or cranberries, etc. Whatever the images are, you disassociate, create a new image. An image by association is the opposite strategy, where you take your product which otherwise has a negative image because of the industry, and you make it associated with people that you respect and admire. So I have seen commercials, for example, by Honda, a motorcycle, not automobile, and Honda came out with a great campaign, nicest people ride on a Honda. And they would see actually a bishop or a cardinal riding on a Honda to go to the church. They will see a young couple going to the college on a campus on a Honda. Motorcycle had the image at that time of beatniks, renegades, you might remember. Harley Davidson used to be sort of the Hells Angels kind of an image. Sort of the fringe of the society patronized that product. Honda was not in that category. They wanted to create different image by associating with other people that we all want to emulate, respect, etc. So that's what you can do. We identified 6 different reasons why market does not adopt innovation. 3 rational, 3 emotional. So what I've done is to put a 2x2 matrix. Most of you who know me, I'm quite used to using 2x2 matrix, and there are jokes about me to use 2x2 matrix in everything in my life. I like that framework personally, and it really crystallizes in my mind the typical trade-off between one dimension versus the other dimension. So I have done that thing in the next chart here, where, for example, the 3 rational reasons why customers resist adoption, which is a poor performance, lack of value, usage incompatibility. If that's very low, and 3 emotional reasons, perceived risk, negative image, and tradition, and that is very low, you are in the lower left quadrant, there first mover advantage will always work. Whoever is the pioneer and moves aggressively will have market created. There is no resistance of any kind. On the other hand, if you are in the upper right corner, where you have a whole rational reasons that are coming in the way and emotional reasons that are coming in the way, you will have what I call dual resistance. And therefore, you will need there both R&D change, product change, technology change, as well as the marketing communication change, branding, positioning, whatever you do, you will need that. Lower right is basically rational reasons. There's a performance problem, value problem, which means product is not ready for prime time. It's not ready for sales and marketing. Send it back to the laboratory people, send it back to the manufacturer people. So I call it R&D intervention. Upper left, where performance is not a problem, rational reasons are not there, but there are emotional reasons or image, tradition, risk reasons. In that case, it requires marketing intervention, especially marketing communication, marketing education, public policy that we all talked about. That's the upper left. And again, upper right, you need both R&D as well as marketing. By definition, therefore, in the upper right, any innovation will take a long time and most likely fail. And therefore, in most industries, the pioneers never make money. They invent, they create the technology. It is the second wave of the industry. First wave of pioneers all die. It is the second wave that begins to make money, as I've seen in, for example, video game players. Atari, Intellivision, and one more company from California all died. The Japanese perfected the technology. They removed all of the image issues. They had a proper marketing communication, channels of distribution, and came out with a success with companies like Nintendo, Sega, you might remember as a name, and of course Sony, PlayStation 2 more recently. But Sony went into that business to diversify from radios and television. Fascinating. So it is the second wave that makes money if you are in the upper right, and many social innovations, especially in education, in healthcare, highly regulated industries which have to be policy driven along with market driven, are in the upper right hand quadrant. And that's where biggest failure that you see in innovations. We talk about the successes, but we never realize that for one success we talk about, there are probably 100, if not 1,000 failures that we don't talk about. So let me conclude. Most innovations fail in the marketplace. I'm talking about true innovations, not just product improvements or packaging improvements. More innovations succeed by accident than by business plan, despite prior market research. And we gave several examples like the cell phone, success by accident, Mustang car on the other side. There are 3 rational reasons why customers do not adopt innovation: poor performance, lack of relative value, and usage incompatibility. There are also 3 emotional reasons why customers don't adopt innovation: perceived risk, negative image, and orthodoxy or tradition, a belief system. If both rational and emotional reasons are low, there will be rapid adoption of the innovation. The first mover advantage is key to succeed in this business, which means put all of the ammunition and gun for it. If rational barriers are predominant, then R&D based innovation will be key. Operations, R&D, supply chain, manufacturing, that kind. If emotional barriers are predominant, then marketing, communication, branding, positioning, imaging by association or disassociation that we all talked about, reducing the risk is likely to key. It's all marketing essentially. And of course, last point is that if both rational and emotional barriers are prevalent, then you have to have a combination of R&D and marketing communication intervention to succeed in the marketplace.
Thanks for listening to this lecture on why innovations fail with Professor Jagdish Sheth. For more about Professor Sheth and the Sheth Leadership Academy, you can visit www.shethleadershipacademy.com.